Okay, cool. We do have some viewers, so we can get started and get to people's questions. So this was a popular one, right? So and it's one that people ask about quite a lot. So building muscle versus building strength, and this is actually a topic that I'm definitely more knowledgeable about than I was about our topic last week, which was your area of expertise. So that was all about insulin and diabetes. Definitely not my area. This one's a little more in line with my knowledge and the people that I've worked with in the past. And there's a correlation between building muscle and building strength, but then there's also a lot of differences. So I would what I'll do is I'm going to summarize kind of my understanding, Brad, and then if you want to just tell me if you think that's give me your input on that. We can dive into these questions, but I think essentially to summarize this, the idea, there's strength is kind of the way I put it is the summation of multiple muscle groups working in conjunction with one another to move a force, right? There's neurological adaptations. You become more efficient at a certain lift, right? The first time you pick up a dumbbell, you're going to look kind of awkward, but by the 100th time you've done it, your form's going to be better. And because your form's better and you've done it multiple times, you're going to be able to lift more, even if you didn't necessarily build muscle, right? So you've got improvements in your lifting efficiency, in your form, your mechanics, and muscle fiber recruitment, right? Then there's strength, then there's muscle building, which is actually the act of building muscle, right? Hypertrophy. So they definitely can correlate, but you can get stronger at a lift without necessarily gaining muscle. Would you agree with that or disagree with any of that?
I mean, I think broadly speaking, that's correct. I think there's a lot of details we should discuss before we jump into questions that I think will maybe help answer some questions. And I think the best way to start the discussion, I don't know if there's a perfect logical order to go through this, but I think let's start with the first piece of human movement it always occurs around a joint, right? Mm-hmm. So basically everything is in circles or arcs, mm-hmm. right? For the most part. I mean, we do have some translational joints, but basically every major movement, like bicep curl is around an arc, shoulder is around an arc, bench press is around an arc, rows around an arc, etc. Right? And so basically you have a few major components that go into moving, right? So you have basically your contractile tissue, which is your muscle tissue, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. You have the connective tissue that connects basically the contractile tissue to the joint, across the joint, right? And then all that translates into movement. Now, in order to cause a muscle to fire or to contract, you have to have a neurological input, right? And so understanding all of those pieces is really important when you try to understand how your body produces strength or force around a joint, right?
Yeah.
So there's a couple things that determine how much force you can produce, and we're going to focus primarily on the contractile side, not the connective tissue side. So the most obvious one, and why we usually kind of connect muscle size to strength, is the more muscle tissue you have, the greater total capacity that muscle tissue has to produce force, right? Think about it let's say you're playing tug of war, right? If you have one person pulling the rope versus 100 people pulling the rope, which one's going to produce more force, right? The one with 100 people. But creating muscle tissue takes a lot of time, and it is very energetically expensive, right? So you have to have a calorie surplus, you have to have the right nutrients, and you have to have the right signals, and you have to have the right amount of time to build enough muscle tissue. And that usually takes appreciable amounts of muscle tissue that can change your ability to produce force at a meaningful level, takes weeks or months, right? But what's interesting is we see the first 4 to 6 weeks of, if anybody's ever lifted weights, they get a lot stronger, right? the second week you're in the gym, you usually can lift way more than the first. So what's going on? So in your muscle, in a given muscle, like let's just say your bicep, right? You have a lot of individual muscle fibers, right? And groups of muscle fibers are turned on by these things called motor units, right? So think about it like you have a bunch of wires connecting. Let's just say you have, I'm just going to keep the math easy. Let's say you have 100 muscle fibers in your bicep. And let's say 2 or 3 of those muscle fibers are all connected to one electrical input, right? So your body actually does a very good job of effectively only turning on the amount of muscles tissue that you need to do a given task, right? So when you start lifting a weight, let's say it's 5 pounds, your muscle will just turn on enough muscle fibers to lift 5 pounds, right?
Right.
And so if that's all you've ever lifted, your brain really only knows like, hey, I only need to turn on these amount of muscle fibers.
Right.
As you go from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 pounds, your brain learns to send signals to more motor units and recruit more muscle fibers, right? So over the course of the first few weeks, you're basically training your nervous system to turn on more motor units, right? Or basically provide more electricity to your muscles to contract more of the total available muscle fibers.
Right.
And so that process gets really complicated, but that's effectively part of just natural motor learning in humans, right? We have this principle where you basically recruit as much as you need to get the job done, right? It's why when you can gradiate the amount of force, like you can push 10 pounds, you can push 100 pounds at the same speed because your brain knows how many muscle fibers to recruit in order to get the job done. And so building strength versus building muscle often utilize very different adaptations, right? So strength, especially early, is really training the nervous system, right? It's training how many motor units you recruit, how fast you recruit all of them, the coordination of recruiting them if you're doing something that requires multiple muscle groups instead of single muscle groups. And so that's generally the initial phases of strength adaptation, right? And then at some point you get to the limit where you've kind of maxed out that recruitment, right?
Yeah.
And then this is when starting to add more contractile tissue really becomes the rate limiter for being able to generate force, right? This is fundamentally why we have like weight categories in sports like weightlifting or powerlifting, right? You can, once you've kind of maxed out your neural recruitment, it starts to then become more about building muscle to increase that top end size of strength.
Right.
So that's why you see even people who are like power lifters, they have to do, hypertrophy based training to build additional contractile tissue. So that's kind of at the high level, those concepts.
That was a really good, everything you said is exactly what I was going to say, Brad. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
No, that was really good. That was a really good breakdown of it and explanation. I had several questions as you were, several points that I was going to make as you were bringing some of that up, but we can park those for now. But yeah, really, really good breakdown. We can just dive into the questions because we do have questions that are related to a lot of things that you just explained. The first question here, actually, this isn't really a question, but this person's pretty excited. She said her only goal right now is strength, but I'm slowly getting wider as well. And I don't want to buy new clothes again soon. I love my clothes and I love my body where it's at, but I need to be able to pick up my mother. So, maybe what she's referring to though, because she's talking about, so somebody wants to get stronger. She says her only goal is strength, but I'm slowly getting wider as well. To me, that would indicate that you are building muscle, likely. And if she's in a calorie surplus, it's possible it's not muscle. But is there any way that, do you think, can people get stronger with, let's say they don't want to build muscle. They don't want to increase their muscle for whatever reason. Is there a way to simply just get stronger without building muscle? Can somebody do that?
They can up to a certain point, right? At some point, you will reach kind of your limit of whatever your current tissue is to produce force.
Yeah.
But I would say most people fail to reach that point, right? I think one of the really difficult things that people run into is they've, unless you do this early in life, generally in kind of your teens, 20s,
Yeah.
maybe 30s, is trying to teach your body what true like strength failure is becomes very difficult,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think most people really struggle to figure out what does it feel like to do a true 1 rep max on something like a back squat, right? I think doing that when you're 18 to 25 is much different than doing it when you're 45.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, if your goal is to just increase your maximal strength, trying to learn and figure out how to safely train in that 85, 90, 95, 98, 100% of maximal range is a skill that has to be learned. One, because like, I'll be totally honest, I haven't done like a true max back squat in 7 years.
Yeah. It's probably been 10 for me, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think very few people test that. And so I think if your goal really is to just, how can I get as strong as possible without adding any body weight? You've got to learn and train how to do that consistently and repeatedly over time. Right. And I think the more you train it, the easier it becomes. But trying to do a maximal effort anything is definitely a skill and something you have to like train and try to build towards. And I would say most people really struggle with that. And I think that's something that you've really got to figure out how to train.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned at the beginning of that, and that is, people. So when I look back on when I started, training or taking weightlifting more seriously, and I was probably that wasn't until I was like 18 or 19, and even then, like my primary interest was like all upper body stuff, right? I did the typical like I just want to look good, like with arms and chest. So I did a lot of bench press and like curls and just stupid stuff, right? I look back on it now and I think, man, if I had started like training properly when I was 13 years old, 14 years old, 15, and just had a chance to like really build up that base strength, you pretty much, if you can do that around that age, you pretty much maintain that for life. Maybe not maintain, but like if that's your base, you're going to be able to keep that much better than you would if you start around, let's say 28, for example.
As long as you keep testing it, right? Like if you get to a 800-pound back squat and then you don't squat ever again, like maybe when you're 45, you could go throw 500 pounds in the bar and still do it, but you're not going to be able to do 800, right? Like you've got to maintain, you have to maintain kind of that your body's ability to push to that extent.
Yeah. So this is kind of my question to you is when people start, the people who do train when they're younger in that 13 to 14, 15 age range,
I would say it's probably more like 18 to 25, right?
I think so?
Yeah. I mean, 13, 14, 15, your body just doesn't have the capacity. I mean, have you ever seen a 15-year-old who's in peak physical condition squat, deadlift, more than a 25-year-old? No, you just don't.
No. What I'm saying, so where I'm going with this question is why is it that the earlier you start training and weightlifting, why is it easier for those people to maintain that muscle mass than it would be for someone who's trying to do that when they're older, right? Like the physiological adaptations seem to be something that stick with you for life in terms of like your muscle size and your base, stick with you for life better than if you start later in life, like as you're growing. Is there any legitimate, merit to that?
Yes, but I don't think it's 13, 14, 15. I think it's because I mean, you've got to think this is especially true for men, right? The peak years where your body is like able to add muscle tissue, I mean, depending on when you hit puberty, is 15 to 30, right?
Sure.
I mean, most of that's probably your 6 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23. Like that's kind of your peak years. And then after that, your ability to add muscle tissue
Right.
per year drops, right? So that's when you have to kind of maximize, especially the muscle growth phase of things, right? Now, the
Yeah.
strength piece,
Yeah.
I think is a little bit different. I mean, I think also, when we started the conversation, we kind of left connective tissue out of the discussion, but I think one of the other pieces of consistently training at higher ends, of the strength range is you start to increase the capacity of your connective tissue,
Yeah.
like specifically your tendons and their ability to like store and deploy elastic energy, right? So there's a reason why, like anybody who's ever done a back squat, like if you bounce out of the bottom, it's way easier than if you pause at the bottom.
Yes.
Right? Because you get a
Yeah.
lot of that elastic energy from like the tendons at the end of their range of motion, right?
For sure.
And so that's also something you have to train, because your body always adapts to what you put it under, right? So if you don't load your tendons never get stronger and more efficient at storing energy, right? So you have to do that. This is also one of the reasons, like, if you've ever watched people who have like the highest vertical leap, it's never the people with 1,000-pound squat, right?
Well, that's a different type of muscle fiber too.
No, it has nothing to do with the muscle fiber. It has everything to do with the connective tissue, right?
Okay, sure.
I mean, it's your tendons and your connective tissue's ability to rapidly store and deploy energy, right? It's the reason why, like,
wouldn't that be using the fast twitch muscle fibers more than the slow twitch?
Yes, but a squat would be mostly fast twitch, right? Even if it's a pause squat, it's still fast twitch muscle fiber.
Yeah.
Right. Slow twitch is oxidative, lower force
Longer
generation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Cool. All right, cool. So next question we've got is, and I don't know if this is, maybe, she says, I've been thinking about this. I'm still learning and told my husband I look stronger but have no strength. So she didn't really ask that in the form of a question, but I think, her point is like, it sounds like she wants to gain strength. So like, how do I gain strength? Aside from just a generic, you follow the principle of progressive overload, right? Like make sure that you're continually adding, whether that's more weight to the bar, whether it's more reps, more sets, or both, whether it's decreased rest time, always trying to do a little bit more than you did before is obviously one way to gain strength. Aside from, sort of just a generalized recommendation like that, what can this person do to gain strength? She says that's her one thing that she's wanting to gain. What would be your recommendation?
Yeah, so I think this is where we start to get to the discussion of how you differentially train for strength versus building muscle. So first, I think the first thing to say is these things occur on a spectrum, right? You can train more towards strength or more towards hypertrophy, but they're never like two distinct things. And it really comes down to what drives strength adaptations versus what drives muscle growth. And let's start with the muscle growth piece. The exact things that drive muscle growth are not 100% understood. So there's still a little bit of ambiguity of like what is really the primary drivers, but we know the things that contribute to it, right? It comes down to the overall work that muscle tissue does, right? So it's kind of total training volume, the amount of metabolic stress that it has, the amount of kind of muscle damage that occurs to some extent affects it, and the amount of like calories and nutrients the body has to recover, right? So if you're training for hypertrophy, there's some principles that you need to like really consider. One is total volume of training has to increase over time, right? So like, and what that means is if you add up, like if you take every set and you times it by the number of reps and the number of weights. So let's say you did 10 sets, let's just keep the math easy. Let's say you did a set of 10 reps at 10 pounds, right? That's 100 pounds.
Yep.
And you did 3 sets of that, right? That would be, 300 pounds. So let's say that was your total workout. That's 300 pounds. The next week, you need to do 400 pounds, right? So you need to either go to 4 sets or you need to go to, whatever. You have to change the other variables.
Yeah.
Now, there is kind of there's a space in which you have to constrain those variables, right? You can't go do, it's not realistic to expect that you're going to get the same muscle growth from doing 100 reps of 1 pound versus 10 reps of 10 pounds, right?
Sure.
Like the amount of total stress that gets placed on the system is different. So for most people, how this works is you need to find a rep range that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 reps to 20 reps for a weight that you can increase the weight systematically over time. And you're going to kind of vary between the 5 reps and the 20 reps over time. Like that's kind of roughly the range of a given set. And then you just need to change the total amount of like volume over time, right? So that's kind of training for hypertrophy. You want to try to get as many of your sets within a rep or 2 of failure as possible. You need to be in a calorie surplus. All those things go into account. There's somebody who's going to walk in my door in a minute, so everyone's going to hear my dogs lose their absolute minds here in a second. So that's kind of the general concepts of training for hypertrophy. The total load in terms of what percent of your maximal effort that is, you're probably going to be training somewhere in the 50 to 75% of max effort for those sets. Training for strength looks much more like sets of 1 to 5, right? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 85, 90% of max effort. You're going to be training more for, it's going to be less about total volume and how many reps you can do as close to your maximal amount of weight as possible. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to train the nervous system. You're trying to build the kind of elastic connective tissue. You're trying to build the coordination. Like all those are the things that go into training for strength, right? That's why when you see powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, it's sets of 1, sets of 3, sets of 5. Right. When you see bodybuilding, it's sometimes sets of 5, more it's sets of 8, 12, 20, those things. So you're basically training the different like systems of your body as you're doing that. And so that's why, when you think about training for strength versus hypertrophy, that's kind of the general concept of what you get at. And so I think then on the nutrition side of things, like training for strength really comes down to maintaining body weight, maintaining an energy balance, and allowing your body to like recover from exercise rather than trying to provide additional nutrients to build additional tissue.
It's a great explanation. And something you said, and then we'll move on to the next question. But one of the things that you said, and we get the question a lot is, and you probably see it all the time in the group, how many reps should I be doing? Like what's like the ideal rep range? Like how much of exercise B or C or whatever should I be doing? And I came across something a long time ago and I've saved it on my phone. And the explanation was this. When training with multiple sets to failure, we achieve the same hypertrophy regardless of the weight on the bar. This is because only the last few reps of a set trigger growth. These stimulating reps are where recruitment is high, all fibers are working, and bar speeds are slow, tension is high. In fact, when effort is high, bar speeds are identical at the same reps in reserve, regardless of the weight on the bar. So the tension dosage is identical, right? So it's basically saying train close to failure because those last few reps, when you're close to failure, the bar speed and the tension is identical, regardless of what rep range there was, right? So it's basically saying train close to, as you mentioned, as you kind of alluded to, train close to failure because those last few reps where motor recruitment is super high, those are the stimulating reps. So I think for people, the reason I bring that up is people ask, what rep range should I do? Like you suggested, pick somewhere between 5 or 20, whatever that ends up being for you, but just go close to failure, right? Where you're 1 to 2 reps maybe left in the tank at most. You train close to failure, you should be able to grow muscle. I think it's kind of the overall takeaway there.
Yeah, and I think, realistically, I mean, if people kind of break this down to first principles and you think about it is, if you're only doing 1 to failure, like 1 rep to failure, right? What's really happening is you're not getting a lot of total muscle recruitment, or are you getting 1 rep of muscle recruitment?
Yeah,
right?
that's yeah.
If you do 100, you're really just getting like metabolic failure, not like true tissue failure, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think the reason those middle rep ranges work the most is you're effectively getting all of those different pieces, right? You're getting like
Yeah.
nervous system failure, you're getting like mechanical tissue failure, you're getting metabolic failure. Like those are what's really happening when you get in those middle rep ranges versus if you're on
Yeah.
one side of the extreme or the other, you're really only getting one piece.
Yeah, that's a great point. Cool. The next question we've got is now this one we already answered, so we'll skip this, kind of a repeat. Are there different strength categories that have better exercises to accomplish them, i.e. lifting a parent versus, I don't know what she means by lifting a parent versus a faster split on a 400-meter race? So I think basically what she's asking
I have
is,
no idea what that means.
yeah, well, I think there was a typo in there. Are there different strength categories that have better exercises to accomplish them? So like, I think, and maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but the way I sort of read this is like what exercises translate to, I mean, there are certain exercises that translate to a specific task you're trying to accomplish, right? So like, okay, so for example, if I'm trying to get better, let's say I want to get better at I want to become faster at sprinting. What like weight training exercises would I do for that particular, act? And obviously sprinting is going to help benefit you when it comes to sprinting. You want to sprint more, but like if I'm going to lift weights, like what kind of exercises and strength categories, so to speak, should I be doing if I want to increase my sprint? Just as an example.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in that case, you need to focus on a couple things. One is the rate of force development, right? So that means like if you do a deadlift versus if you do a clean, right? Your rate of force development is different, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sprinting it's not always about maximal force production, right? There's a reason like the world record holder in a squat is not the best sprinter.
Yeah.
Right? Rate of force development is a big piece, right? The connective tissue training is a big piece, right? Because sprinting is a lot of elastic energy stored. So you need to train the muscle groups, so the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads, the calves, the tibs, like those all need to be trained. They need to be trained, and the rate of force development that they need to be trained, right? So how quickly can you produce force?
Right.
And then you have to train the metabolic systems, right? That's a highly glycolytic anaerobic activity. So you need to train, if you're doing weightlifting, you probably need to do training across like 1 to 5 reps because you need to develop the explosiveness. You also need to train in probably the 6 to 20 reps because you need to build the metabolic machinery to like produce force repeatedly for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 seconds, depending on what, if you're doing 100, 200, 400, etc. So you need to think about all of those pieces to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This one talks about, can you talk about building strength while in a deficit? Is that possible? And I've always this is another question we get commonly. And again, you can get into the nuances of it, but as a generalized answer, sort of a blanket answer, I do think, yes, I mean, you can build, when we define strength differently than muscle building, which we've done. Yeah, you can get stronger in a few different ways while being in a deficit. Whether that's your mechanics are better, you're more efficient at lifting, you've done something 100 times, and so your motor recruitment is more synchronized. We talk about synchronicity, so I think that's possible. But maybe you could dive into the intricacies of that. So again, can you build strength while in a deficit?
Yeah, so I think 1, you can. 2, I think how much you can will depend on how close to your kind of peak potential you are for your current body frame, right?
Yeah.
So if you're just starting weightlifting, you can build a lot of strength in a deficit.
You're gonna have a bigger ceiling for sure.
If you've been training for 30 years,
right,
your ability to build strength in a deficit is probably pretty minimal, unless it's like, hey, you've been training at submaximal loads for the last 10 years and you're now going to go power lift and you're going to train it towards maximal load and you're in a slight deficit. Then that's probably a little different, but it's a lot of it will depend on how close to your kind of maximal potential of your current body frame you are. So that I would say, yes, it's possible. Second, it's definitely not optimal, right? And this is, I think, where, a lot of times if you kind of view your health, fitness, transformation journey, whatever you want to call it, over a 30 to 40 year timeline, it gives you a much better perspective versus if you're trying to view it 6 to 12 months at a time. One of the things I've seen after coaching or overseeing the coaching of a ton of clients is people try to drive with their foot on the gas pedal while they have the emergency brake on.
It's an interesting.
Like, if you want to get as strong as you can in the next year, why would you also want to be putting your body in a position where it's going to be not recovering optimally, right? If you actually break it down, I would say most people, if they lost 20 to 50 pounds in that range, they'd be super happy with their body.
Yeah.
Basically, anybody with a focused 6 to maybe 24 months out of their entire life can do that, right?
Yeah.
That means you have the other 28 years to focus on all the other things that matter, right? So if this year you really just want to get strong, let's just put off losing weight until next year, right? If you're going to be busting your butt in the gym and really training hard and trying to get close to failure and really trying to get stronger and faster and more capable and, build muscle for the next 30 years of your life and improve your bone density and be able to, age gracefully, like, why not put all your eggs in that basket for a year? And then next year we can worry about, hey, let's just maintain what you built while you're losing some body weight, right?
That's a great point.
I think the more people start to think about their journeys over those long periods of time, the better decisions you make, right? It's kind of like running a business. If you're just trying to make quarterly numbers, it may be great today, but 6 months from now, you're going to be like, oh, shit, all those things are coming back to bite me in the butt, right? Whereas it's like, hey, if I'm planning 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you'll make better decisions that maybe have a little bit of short-term discomfort, but actually pay off way better in the end.
So I think when you talk about people in their nutrition and fitness goals, maybe people are trying to do too many things at once instead of, one goal. Because I think one of the reasons people spin their wheels a lot is they have conflicting goals, where your suggestion is, let's focus on this one thing for the year. You get that out of the way, then it's to the next thing. So yours is more of it's a systematic, purposeful approach rather than trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to, really narrow your focus.
Here's one of the conversations I remember having with a client a while ago, and it actually, there's somebody who put a question here in the comments. There's a lot of people who want to try to thread this perfect needle of, hey, I want to put on 4 to 5 pounds of muscle tissue, but I don't want to gain an ounce of body fat. And this is a conversation I had with a client a while ago. I go, of all the people on the planet, who do you think have not only the most knowledge and technical skills, but also the discipline to thread that needle as tight as possible and try to build as much muscle tissue without gaining body fat as possible? And the answer is professional bodybuilders, right? They literally get paid to do this. But what do professional bodybuilders do? They don't do that. They just go, it makes way more sense and is way more efficient to just try to maximize building muscle when I'm building muscle, and just accept that, I'm probably going to gain 2, 3, maybe 4% body fat during the off season, right? And then with 18 weeks of focused dieting, I'll lose that extra amount, but I gained a whole ton of muscle in the process.
Yeah.
If the people who are the best in the world utilize that approach, let's take all the pharmacotherapy out of it. if the best people in the world take that approach, why should we as people who like, I don't know, go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week and just like want to look a little bit better in our bathing suit? Like, why
would
are we trying to thread the needle more than the professionals thread the needle?
It's a good point. It's
right?
A good way to put
it's
put
like
it, yep.
If I were to ask an NBA player, hey, I'll give you 50 million if you make this free throw, or I'll give you 500 million if you make this full court shot. Like, NBA players are going to be like, dude, give me the 50 mil for a free throw. That's free money. Right? But most people would be like, nah, I'm going to take the 500 for like the full court shot, right? And they just don't think about it in terms of like, what is the most efficient way to actually get to my goal?
Yeah. No, it's a good analogy. You have your basketball analogies are great, man. You often correlate.
That's the only thing I ever think about all day.
I know, it's great. I love your basketball analogies. And if there's anything I've learned working with you over the last 6 or 7 years, whatever it's been, there's a lot of correlation between business and basketball. That's what I've learned. There's a lot of crossover there. Like a lot of lessons that you can take from your basketball and apply them to business.
I just got to figure out how to make NBA money. Those contracts right now are insane.
They
like
are.
Normal dudes are getting 20 mil a year.
Yeah, and the NFL is even more.
No, the NFL makes
quarterbacks. Show me an NBA player who's making more than
show me the median contract of an NFL player versus the median contract of an NBA player.
I'm taking the outliers. The top paid NFL players get paid more than the top NBA players.
What's the highest contract in the NFL right now? How much a year?
It is the Jordan Love from the Packers. He just got signed to 4-year, $220 million.
Yeah, that's less than the NBA. It's $67 million a year now. Yeah, those guys are making insane money. It's so crazy. Good for them.
Well, we're gonna have to
that bag.
We'll have to come back to that topic. We're getting off hand here. But anyways, so this is a good one. How do the two correlate with each other? Best workouts to build up strength and stamina and keep it, especially post-menopause. For context, I do SAR work where strength and stamina is a huge component. I think she's referring to search and rescue work.
Search and rescue.
Right. So I just thought that was an interesting question. So if you want to, what's your advice there?
Yeah. So if we kind of go back to the opening salvo, we'll say, of this conversation is they're definitely correlated in the fact that the amount of total muscle tissue you have helps determine the maximal potential strength you can have, right? Like at some point, the limiting factor for producing force is the total amount of muscle tissue you have. Most people rarely get there in many aspects of their life, but that is kind of what it comes down to at the end of the day. But if let's just say you're relatively happy with the like physical size you have, if you're trying to build strength and endurance, what you need to do is you need to spend periods of time training towards kind of the maximal strength range, right? So you need to be doing like periodized blocks of basically powerlifting, right? In that 85+% intensity range, 1 to 5 reps. You need to be progressively overloading that so you can build kind of that maximal capacity of strength. And then you need to spend blocks of time or periods of time training in kind of that to where you're now testing that ceiling, but for extended periods, right? So you're training in that 70 to 85% for the, 10, 15, 20 reps. Yeah. And then you need to spend time doing just like building an aerobic base, right? Because the real thought process is what I need to do is over a 10, 15, 20-year period, I need to figure out how I can increase the ceiling of my strength level, right? So like this year, my max deadlift is 200 pounds. Next year, my max deadlift is 225. The next year, it's 250. The next year, it's 275. And then all of that sub-maximal work ends up coming along with it, right? So within 10 years, your max deadlift has gone from 200 to 350, but your sub-maximal work is at the end of 10 years is now greater than the maximal work you did 10 years ago. So you just need to think about like carrying the maximal and the submaximal up over time.
Yep, that's a great point. I thought that was cool. A cool question. I also think search and rescue work sounds pretty badass. So
that is pretty wild.
This next one, we've got a few left, so we still got time here. But Kimberly wants to know best ways to build strength at 50 plus years of age while minimizing chances of injury. And this one's also interesting to me because I think it highlights one of the misconceptions that, I mean, it can be harder to build muscle the older you get versus when you were younger. There's that much is known, but it's definitely not impossible. And you can build muscle at any age. And I think you just have to go about it. You don't have to go about it in drastically different ways. I think you need to just, you need to consider things like training volume, the type of exercise. There are probably exercises you don't necessarily want to do when you're older because, the chances of injury are maybe not worth it. But in general, what do you think are the best ways to strength train when you're getting into that 50 and 60 year old range?
Yeah, so I think at least from my thought process, and this may be not 100% validated in the literature, but I think from what I've seen working with some people in that population is one, I think exercise selection matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm probably not going to have a 50-year-old woman doing max effort power cleans, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm probably going to have them doing max effort like trap bar deadlifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very similar movement patterns. The risk reward ratio is way different. So I think exercise selection will matter a lot.
Would you say to that point, Brad, would you say, because the way I think of it is what's like functional lifts? Like what's going to help me?
I don't really like
what's going to help me?
The
What's going to help me
functional, right?
Well, what I mean is like things that are going to help me. What's going to translate to real world stuff that I'm doing in my everyday life?
Yes and no. I mean, I think I understand that point, but like realistically, nothing you do in the gym is directly translate. Like the argument is, the older you get, the harder it is to get up and off the toilet. But like maximal hex bar deadlifts are not what's going to like keep you from doing that, right? So it's like that argument starts to break down. So what I mean, so back to the so I think the first piece is like making sure you have smart exercise selection, like minimizing the risk to reward ratio / maximizing the reward to risk ratio. And so just being smart with that. Two is I think it's really important that people in their 50s and above really think about testing their maximal effort, because I think a lot of times that just doesn't happen, right? So I do think it's important to do some of these more higher intensity, and by that I mean like total percent of max effort things. Like I think it's important that they do those. I don't think they should stop doing those just because they've reached 50, 60, 70, 80. I think it's important to continue to try to maintain that ceiling of maximal force production.
Yeah.
So I think don't shy away from high effort exercise. Just be smart with the exercise selection. 3 is what we've seen is to reduce the risk of injury, you probably need to do a little bit less volume and a little bit less frequency than you did when you were younger, right? So like if you're going to be doing, high load hex bar deadlifts, you probably don't need to be doing 5 sets of 10, right? You probably need to be doing 3 sets of 5. And you probably don't need to do those 3 days a week. You probably need to do those 1 day a week because your capacity to recover is less the older you get.
Yes.
And the likelihood of injury tends to increase when you're fatigued during an exercise and your form starts to break down. That's generally when injury starts to set in. So those are the things that you need to consider. That would be my advice. So exercise selection matters. Continue to keep things higher intensity. Be careful with the volume and the frequency. is going to matter more as you're older than when you're younger?
This this next question I love because it kind of relates to this to the most recent question, but also it's something I was going to bring up, and that is I want to talk about why and how lifting weights and exercise in general, but since we're on the topic of training and muscle growth, we're typically talking about lifting weights, why that can increase your lifespan. And so the next question relates to that, and that is one more beneficial than the other for long-term health, right? So we think about, okay, long-term health does pretty much mean like, okay, am I maximizing my lifespan? Am I living healthily as long as possible? How do these things affect that? Why do they increase my chances of living a longer life? Like, how does all that work?
So I would say, one, they're not mutually exclusive, right? You don't have to just train your whole life to build strength or just train your whole life to build muscle. Like, you can spend periods of time doing both, and that's what you should be doing. Two, doing either is going to, one, slow the age-related decline in both muscle tissue and bone tissue, right? So we lose about 3 to 8% of our total muscle mass per decade over the age of 35. Like, that's a lot.
That is.
Right? So between the age of 35 and 75, you could lose up to 32% of your total muscle mass. Like, that's a lot. That is an absolute boatload. Doing either strength training or focusing on building muscle is going to drastically reduce that decline, right? So which one's optimal, they're both important. Both are going to kind of help slow that decline. The other thing is loading your body, either building muscle or building strength, is also going to put stimulus on your skeleton to maintain bone tissue, right? So either one is going to be really important to do. Ideally, try to spend periods of your life doing both, and don't just spend 30 years doing one or the other, because I would say they both matter.
So why do and maybe if this is too long of an explanation, let me know. We can park this for some other time. But I'm really interested in having you tell people why these things, why and how it increases your lifespan. Like, why does exercise do that? Why does decrease bone density and decreased muscle mass mean potentially shorter lifespan? Like, there are really interesting explanations for that. I find those fascinating. So if it's not too long of an answer, maybe you could shed some light on that.
So I'll see if I can get through this in 9 minutes, because that's all the time we have left. So starting with muscle mass, there's a few major reasons why maintaining your skeletal muscle mass adds years to your life and quality to the years of your life. And this is in no particular order of importance. One is your skeletal muscle is probably the largest metabolic sink you have, and the greatest protector you have against like chronic diseases like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc. So the larger your metabolic sink and the healthier your metabolic sink, the more resilient your body is going to be at handling energy surpluses, etc. Right? So the state of your skeletal muscle mass definitely is a direct correlate to the overall metabolic health of your body, right? There's a whole lot of details we get into there, but I think that, like, safe to say that's enough. Two, the greater your muscle mass and the more effective it is, so the greater its ability to produce force and do what it needs to do, the less likely you are to end up in an institution like a nursing home, a skilled nursing facility, a retirement home, etc. And we know that once you're quote unquote institutionalized, just meaning like you're no longer living on you're not this is how we define it in the literature. It's like institutional versus community dwelling. So this is not like derogatory terms. It's just like that's how we define it in the literature. Your overall health declines pretty quickly, right? You are indoors, you're not moving, your vitamin D goes down, your risk of like falls and fractures changes, like all sorts of things. So you basically end up being a community dwelling citizen much longer. So overall quality of life is generally much better. Second, there's direct data, regardless of where you're living, that the greater your body's ability to produce force, the greater your quality of life is over time. I actually published a paper on like hand grip strength and quality of life amongst older people with a colleague of mine, probably, oh my God, 10 years ago now. So like this is data that has been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of the primary reasons for maintaining your muscle mass. Your bone density, were you when you were in Chicago?
Yes, this is what I was going to bring up. I was going to bring this up. That's exactly what. Yes.
This is why people should never listen to me talk, because I just make jokes about everything. So as bone density declines, your risk of having a fracture from a fall goes up dramatically. Mm-hmm. And when in your older years, 50, 60, 70, 80, a fracture of a major bone, specifically like your hip / femur, drastically increases all-cause mortality. Like I think it's people over the age of 70 who experience a hip fracture, like 30% of those people die within a year of their hip fracture. So I think the really terrible joke I made when we were doing like extemporaneous speaking in Chicago, somebody was like, you have to speak for a minute about like why osteoporosis is bad. I think the joke
that was my idea. I gave you.
If your granny breaks her hip, kiss her goodbye. That was the really bad joke I made. But in all seriousness, these things all start to compound, right? Like the compounding nature of maintaining your health is really important, right? So like, here's the scenario I paint for people. You turn 35, you stop being active, you stop lifting weights. All of a sudden, your risk of developing, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease goes up. Okay, now you're really not feeling great. You're really not moving more. You're not going on hikes. You're not riding your bike. You're not walking. You're never going to the gym. You're never playing sports. You're not playing with your grandkids because you just don't feel good. Now you have osteoporosis, right? Okay, you're now, fast forward, you're now 65, right? Okay, you're 65. You are not really in great shape. You can't really take care of yourself. You have osteoporosis. Like daily living's getting tough because you just can't move around. So now your kids are starting to worry about you, and at 70, they're like, hey, Dad, you need to go to a retirement community. Like you need to live in a retirement home. Okay. Now you're institutionalized. You're not getting outside. You're pretty much just hanging out inside. You're playing bingo, which I love bingo. I won like $100 at bingo at the Missoula State Fair a couple of years ago, so that's still my claim to fame. You're there. You slip and you fall because you're in your tiny little apartment and there's water on the shower, like on the bathroom floor. You slip, you fall, you break your hip. And now your risk of dying at 70 is dramatically higher. Other side of the equation, you're 35, you continue to be active, you lift some weights, you walk a lot, you ride your bike, and when you're 65, you are playing golf every day. You're like my parents, you're playing pickleball every day and calling me, asking them why their knees hurt from playing pickleball for 2 or 3 hours a day. Like, you're traveling all over the world. Like, you're an independent, free living adult whose quality of life is high. Your risk of all cause mortality is low, right? So like, those are the pictures you can paint for people in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's like, you're really determining the outcome 30 years from now.
Which is a very powerful thing because, I mean, I have 4 kids. Every single day I tell myself I want to be around for them as long as possible. So that's why I do the things that I do. Interestingly, when I asked you that question in Chicago, I was the one that gave you that topic. I was like, Brad, go talk about osteoporosis. And you did. And so I have firsthand experience about grandma dying. My grandma, and this was I think this was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago now. She was like 80. She was in her 80s, slipped, broke her hip. And then, yeah, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 months later, she was gone. And it was incredible to see just how much that accelerated the decline of her health. It was just like an accelerant is really the way I felt. So, but yeah, interestingly, like, so, and that is another thing that I use for fuel as like, okay, I don't really love to lift weights, but I do it because I don't want to end up like that. And I don't want to end up I don't want scenario A that you just talked about. So, anyways, it's something to keep in mind about, why people should lift weights. I mean, if you really want to stick around for as long as possible, lifting weights and exercising is a must. In addition to eating right and all that other stuff, but
or be born with unbelievable genetics. That's
that's if you hit the genetic lottery, you're lucky. But I think we got through all that. It's good timing because we actually did get through all of the questions. There are other questions on here, but they kind of ask the same thing. So we've pretty much answered the bulk of them. We have some people that are commenting in here as well, but yeah, hopefully you guys found this helpful. It looks like people are happy we did this. So this will be for those of you watching that maybe if you didn't catch the whole thing, this is being posted through our Facebook page. It will remain there. And so you can watch it back if you need to, if you didn't catch the whole thing. So
we're also going to download this video and upload it to YouTube, so it will be available on the tubes.
Yep. That's
and the podcast. I will rip the audio and we'll put it on my podcast too.
When can we have Stefan Guillenet on here on your podcast? We need to get that guy on. I've been wanting to talk to him for a while.
I exchanged emails with him not that long ago.
Did you really? You should ask him to come up.
I think he was working on a paper that I was working on too. I have to go check my email, but yeah.
If you can get in touch with that guy and be like, dude, come on and let us pick your brain about some interesting stuff. He's always a dude I wanted to ask questions to. His book, The Hungry Brain, I thought was awesome. I really like that one. Yeah, if anyone is not familiar with that, go check out the book, The Hungry Brain by Stefan Guillenet. Really great book about why we overeat and how it happens and like what you can do about it. So
cool.
Anyways,
well, I'm off to my next meeting.
Yep. Thank you for joining us, Bradley. We'll catch you guys all later. Hope you all loved it. Peace out.